Okay, guys, we're going to continue talking about totalitarian dictatorships, and we're going to talk about Hitler's Nazi Germany. This presentation is a little bit longer than the last one. It's got 16 slides instead of 6, but I'd like it to turn about the same length, not much longer than 25 minutes. So I'm going to talk rather quickly, and I'm going to move along in the life and times of Adolf Hitler and his rise to power in Nazi Germany. We will not be going into the war yet. We're just trying to establish how Hitler came to power in Germany. So let's begin. Okay, you probably remember that Hitler was an Austrian who hated Austria and especially grew to hate Austria in the time that he spent as a young man in Vienna. Remember what we always say about Austria. It's got that mix of cultures, that mix of ethnicities. That was particularly true in Vienna. And Hitler hated his time there. That's where he grew to develop a lot of his hatred of the mixing of cultures, the mixing of races, and the Jewish people. So I don't want to spend too much time on, kind of the psychoses behind what went on with Hitler. There's all kinds of stuff that you can read about that and toy with, and there's always those internet articles that are coming out or some Facebook post or whatever, or social media thing that's, making the rounds. I'd like to dwell a little bit more on the reality of Hitler and how he got the power he got. And there's enough evil in Hitler that's straight from history without getting into too much of the, Hitler was really, he hated Jews because a Jewish doctor treated his mother, or because a Jewish art scholar rejected him from art school, or all these things, which are partially true. Growing up in Austria, he was exposed to numerous Jewish people, and there is evidence that there were Jewish people within Hitler's own family tree, and that he had his family tree changed to eliminate this in his heritage. Obviously, Hitler was not the Aryan that he talked about. So what do we really want to understand about Hitler and what really fueled him? A lot of his hatred of the Jews was really motivated by what worked for him politically. And Hitler was a pragmatist, and we're going to talk about that today. And that doesn't mean that I'm not saying he hated the Jews. He did, but he also hated the communists at times in his career. He hated the Russians when he wasn't making secret backdoor deals with them. He hated the mentally handicapped. He hated the weak. He hated homosexuals. He hated Romanians. He hated Eastern Europeans of all kinds. So let's really talk about what's driving Hitler and how he gets to the position of power that he gets to. Hitler's one of his best times in life was World War I. This picture is a picture that you might have seen before of Hitler in Munich rejoicing at the German declaration of war going into World War I. You can see that inset picture of him as this announcement is made, and he was pretty excited about World War I because he believed that this was a chance to make Germany great and for Germany to really flex its muscle. Hitler had gone to Germany so that he could join the military in Germany and not in Austria. Did not want to fight for his home nation, but wanted to fight instead for Germany, which he prized as this growing nation and a growing nation of strength. And so when World War I ended with Germany not only signing a treaty of peace, but signing the blame clause, taking responsibility for the war, this made Hitler very angry. And he believed that the German government had stabbed the German people in the back, that the treaty was false, that Germany had taken the blame and was nationally humiliated, and that Germany should have stuck with the war, and they could have won. And so Versailles was particularly bitter for Hitler, but it was also particularly bitter for the people of Germany in general. He was not alone in that. And this was a reality for people who lived in Germany who now felt that there was little hope for them. And in fact, there really was little hope for them. The war had devastated the German economy. And then on top of this, they have lost the war. And the Treaty of Versailles requires them to pay an extreme amount of reparations. If you reread your section, as I asked you to earlier, regarding what they were asked to pay, just an amount that was inconceivable, an amount that was not going to be able to be paid. I always use the illustration when I talk about this in 8th grade, and probably some of you were in that 8th grade lecture, if not all of you, when we talk about Hitler and his rise to power. Some of these slides will be familiar to you, in fact. Before we do the Corrie ten Boom book and before we do Anne Frank, Mrs. Gardner usually has me come in and talk. But if you remember, there was very little hope for the German people, and their desperation was pretty great as far as just having things to eat and having the ability to support themselves. What was owed to the Western powers and then from the Western powers to the United States would have kept the Germans paying until the 1980s. If they had paid the reparations as originally written, and by the way, those reparations were even scaled down a bit, they would have been paying into the 1980s. And so this reparations put on Germany was extremely heavy. Maybe it wasn't as heavy as the French would have wanted it, but the United States wanted its money back from the Western powers, and the British and French wanted a payback from the Germans, more so the French and the British even. And so this was put on Germany, and they were going to pay, and they could not pay. They made 1 year of payments, as your text talks about, and then basically came out and said this isn't going to happen. And so Germany was kind of a mess. Now, Hitler was very disappointed in what was going on in Germany, and so he decided that he was going to try to launch a overthrow of the government that he felt was weak and humiliating, and he was arrested for this public disturbance and called the Beer Hall Putsch, jumping up on a table, as the text puts it, and trying to launch this revolution. He was jailed in 1928, and he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, his book, while he was imprisoned for his revolutionary crimes. Now, Mein Kampf is famous, it's controversial, it's, can be seen as, what's the word that I want, forbidden. In fact, in modern day Germany, it is forbidden. But I think it's important that we understand what Hitler was exploring in Mein Kampf. What exactly was he saying? And so if you want to look at his, did I say 1928, 1923? Sorry, if I said 28 in the last slide, correct. Okay, 1923. So what were the major parts of Mein Kampf? First of all, Lebensraum, which means living space or elbow room, the idea that we need space to move out, and Germans deserve this space. Germans are a superior culture, and so they should expand eastward, and these sub-peoples, like the Jews that might get in the way, or the Slavic peoples, could be used as slave labor or liquidated, as the case may be, gotten out of the way of the expansion of living space for the German or Teutonic peoples, Aryan peoples, whatever. Second, anti-Semitism. Hitler did blame the Jews for Germany's political and economic problems, and he saw everything as a conspiracy of Jewish bankers and leaders. And Hitler's ideas about the Jews were not new. He did not originate these ideas. There had been an anti-Semitic movement in Germany since the 1880s and even a little bit earlier. So Hitler was capitalizing on these things in the midst of economic and political crisis. So you have a government, the Weimar government, that has that is leading Germany. It is governing in the face of the Versailles fallout. It is seen as weak, seen as not having a strong plan to move forward, seen as capitulating to the British, seen as being humiliated by the French, being shoved around by the United States. And so there's a political issue, and there's also an economic issue, and that's only going to worsen with the Great Depression. Lastly, he called for a Führer, okay, a leader dictator. And this Führer must have revolutionary power, must have arbitrary power, authority, might. If you want to fix what's wrong with Germany, you've just got to give this leader absolute power. Democracy is corrupting. It's really a symbol for letting a bunch of cronies get together and pull the strings. Very conspiratorial. A Führer would know how to lead Germany out of its problems. And of course, Hitler is very soon going to recommend himself as the man to be Germany's Führer. So Mein Kampf is written, Hitler. Okay, we're going to spend a minute or two on this slide. There's two important things I want you to understand about Hitler. He was a socialist and he was a social Darwinist. Okay, let's spend a little time here. First of all, let me make something clear. This idea of whether or not Hitler is a socialist seems to be some kind of controversy in modern history, or at least internet history. And I just want to make something clear, okay? Hitler is a socialist. The name of the Nazi Party is the National Socialist German Workers' Party. It preached the message of socialism in Germany. And the socialists of Germany had been gaining power in the Reichstag, gaining power in the amongst the German people for many, many years. We've already talked about this. This is an established fact. This is a historical fact. Okay, a socialist does not mean a Marxian socialist, a communist Russian. Okay, it's not necessarily the same thing. There were all kinds of socialists, moderate socialists, radical socialists, but Hitler's brand of socialism was a bit different. Now, no one's saying by calling Hitler a socialist that he and the Russian communists were the same thing. But I do want to point out that during World War II, Hitler and Stalin had signed a secret non-aggression pact with one another to not attack each other during the war, and that Stalin was shocked out of his socks that Hitler violated that non-aggression pact and attacked him in Operation Barbarossa in 1941. Now, that doesn't mean that they're the same thing politically, but they certainly weren't enemies, okay, to the point that they would not be convenient friends if the situation called for it. And so whether or not Hitler is a socialist to me is not debatable. Hitler is a national socialist, a democratic socialist of Germany, and his socialism had a little bit of a different feel than the Marxian socialism. Basically, there is private ownership in Hitler's socialism, but the private ownership is all still for the good of the state. The state would still own a lot of the means of production, and people were allowed to own some of their own things so that they could promote the German Volk. Okay, Volk, V-O-L-K, like a Volkswagen. Okay, the people's car. All right, people, when you hear Volk, it's folk, it's like the people. All right. And the Volkish doctrines of German socialism were about equalization of class, but in a different sense than maybe the Russian communists. Okay, so the Russian communists, they want to equalize through the power of weapons, through killing the kulaks, through beautiful propaganda. The German Volk socialism is an equalizer in a little bit of a different way. It's going to sound crazy to you, okay, but it's true that German socialism had these experiments where they would give away and promote these cruises these pleasure cruises, and they would mix people from the different classes within Germany, and they put them all on the same ship and say, in Germany, classes don't matter because it's all Volkisch, and these people, they get what Germany is, and so it doesn't matter that some are in this class and some are in this class, because really the most important class is the Volkisch class, right? The car of the people, the Autobahn that we all drive on and that we all find to be the pride of Germany, the German architecture that Hitler's personal and state architect Albert Speer designed to bring a new architectural reality to Germany, okay? This is all Volkisch socialism. But it does look a little bit different than Russian socialism. Certainly, it's a different message. Secondly, Hitler was a social Darwinist. Okay, he believed in the survival of the fittest in terms of the ethnicity and race of peoples, and he believed that therefore some races were not worth saving and that could even be exterminated. Obviously, the things that Hitler did with the Jewish people, I'm sure you're all very familiar with, and I've been learning about for a very long time, and I've read a lot about. And I hope that you've been able to go to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. If you haven't been, please go. If you didn't go on our school trip there. But let me tell you something. Just as striking was Hitler's treatment of the Slavic people as he moved east and went after that elbow room. Shocking treatment of Poles, Czechs, Slovakians, that Hitler also considered to be subhuman, and if they couldn't fight back and if they didn't have the wherewithal to resist, that was because they were not worthy. And that came from his social Darwinism. You know, people try to make it out like Hitler was some kind of a, Christian man. Hitler used the Lutheran Church, co-opted it, and got some Lutherans to follow along. And that was a shame that they did that. And that is why Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who had escaped Nazi Germany as a Lutheran minister, and he was in New York, decided that he would go back to Germany and truly fight against the injustices of the social Darwinist Hitler that was claiming that, oh, yes, I'm a strong Christian man, or he wasn't personally atheistic, messed up psychologically on top of it. But he did give outside credence to state religion if it supported his ideas. At his heart, though, he was an atheist social Darwinist carrying out the pragmatic realities of what social Darwinism is. So that's important to know about Hitler as we move on. Okay, some quotes from Mein Kampf, just in case, because most people have never really read anything from it. Here's a few. The worst danger is that we are interrupting the natural selection process ourselves by caring for the sick and weak. You see that Darwinist aspect. The Nazi Party should not become a constable of public opinion, but must dominate it. It must not become a servant of the masses, but their master. So this is not exactly a classic liberal view, okay, that government should stay out of the way of the people and that it's just there to represent the people in some kind of social contract. No. Dominate public opinion, move it out of the way, and master it. The personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. There's that anti-Semitism that you're looking for that was so evident in Mein Kampf. So clearly he evidences all kinds of ideas, both the repression of dissent, the social Darwinist aspect, and the anti-Semitism that was in Hitler's heart, soul, and in his work, Mein Kampf. All right, so the Great Depression, it makes a bad situation worse in Germany. And the run on the bank that you're seeing here is a absolute panic that Germans will not be able to get their funds out of the bank. Of course, this caused a lot of anger and conspiracies against Jewish financiers. The Great Depression caused, therefore, small businessmen, office workers, artisans, and peasants, all to vote for the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party. Hitler promised to use, what's that again? Oh, government programs, right, because he's a socialist, to end the economic crisis, okay? He didn't say, oh, let's bring about some kind of capitalism or classical liberal. It's ridiculous. He was always for socialist programs, Germany, the German state, fixing these problems for the people. And this caused him to be attractive to a lot of Germans who were in desperate circumstances. In fact, one of the people who were most attracted were German youth. This is a German youth party truck that would be taken around the streets. Of course, many of these young people were strongly attracted to Nazism. One of the main reasons is because they were largely unemployed. And so this would be a group of people that Hitler would say, well, these boys, they're not going around trashing windows and breaking things and causing trouble. They are these lovely young examples of Aryan or pure-blooded or Nazi youth and hope and promise. And so they call here, they say, we say yes to the Fuhrer, right? We all say yes. We are the friends of this Nazi movement, and we believe that Hitler will get us what we need, which is jobs, which is restoration to the humiliation of our nation. No young person wants to grow up thinking that their nation took the blame for an entire war and is economically tattered, has no military, isn't allowed to form a military. This looks pretty militaristic if you're looking at the truck, okay? Some of the Khan Academy videos will point some of this out. And so it's not looking so good for Germany's future. And so as a German youth, you might believe that Hitler offers some promise in terms of a job, in terms of nationalism, in terms of hope for the future. And so Nazism was also a young people's movement. Nazism was also an anti-class movement. And there was a lot of, anger against what was seen as repression. This is particularly important because it's in front of a department store. It says Germans, right? Don't buy from Jews, right? German people, don't buy from Jews. Don't buy from a Jewish-owned department store. This was there were a lot of Jewish-owned stores, department stores that were international and also German Jew-owned. And the Nazi Party at first would just try to enforce boycotts. So you could actually go in this store. I always want to point that out at this point. This was not a line that couldn't be crossed. It was just meant to be a line of intimidation. And many Germans did cross the lines at first and ignore the boycotts to shop in the stores they chose to. But there's starting to be a growing social pressure for people to go along with the anti-Semitism and the pro-German nationalism that Hitler was spinning to get what he wanted politically. By the summer of 1933, Hitler is able to become the Chancellor of Germany. And how does he do this? Well, basically what happens is that Hitler continues to whip up support and whip up anger, and the Weimar government believes that Hitler is better off as an insider than an outsider. That's the quickest way to explain it. They believe that if they encourage him to take a position within the government, in this case the Chancellor of Germany, that he'll be just like them, criticized. He'll get the reality that it's just not that easy to just jump up in beer halls and make speeches and have everybody love you, but you have to deal with the real problems that Germany is dealing with. And so they believe that they could kind of effectually quash him and kind of capitalize on his popularity. And so Hitler does become chancellor in 1933, and he very quickly is going to take advantage of that chancellorship. It was in 1933 that the first Nuremberg laws were put down. You might know Nuremberg from the trial of the Nazi leaders, but first they were a site of anti-Semitic laws. At first, these looked more social, limiting Jewish lawyers from the bar, saying that they could not serve in the military, if the schools were crowded, banning Jews from schools. And at first, there isn't this final solution, work camps, concentration camps. But there is the beginning of it, right? Like this slide says, concentration camps were already being opened, and concentration camps really just means a concentration of a certain people group. And so as people were given less and less opportunities to work or to perform their skills, except in restricted areas, they eventually drew what were called the ghettos, where there were places where they were cordoned off and only Jews were living there, and eventually concentration camps. Also, the beginnings of being marked as a Jew, wearing the yellow star, having to carry a marked passport or papers in order to buy and sell and move throughout German cities. In 1933, there was a fire in the Reichstag. Very controversial historically. Lots of conspiracy theorists abound about this. The fire was started by a dupe that had a mental weakness, and some people would say that the communists started this. Some people would say Hitler started this. The fire damaged the Reichstag building, and Hitler used the opportunity to say this is a conspiracy against the German people, because of course the Reichstag is the German parliament. And he began to immediately say, we have a state of emergency. We've got to press down on these communists that started this Reichstag fire and that are seeking to foment rebellion. And it's just like these radical communists always do. They're always trying to overthrow the government. Now that Hitler's part of the government, he doesn't want to overthrow it anymore. And so he gets these emergency dictatorial degrees and gets these emergency powers. He then says that he has got to make it a one-party state because all of the other parties are in a conspiracy against the Nazi Party, and through the Enabling Act, he makes only one party legal. And then the idea of persecuting the Jews comes out even more after 1933. So you start to see some very public segregation, right? This is a segregated seating, and so no non-Germans can sit on this bench. You start to see very public expressions of anti-Semitism. By 1938, you have what's called Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. I'm sure that you have heard of it before. Within 5 years, there was a rollback on some of the persecution of the Jews when Germany hosted the Olympics. They tried to kind of clean up their act a little bit for the world and make it look like it was better. But Hitler still showed his true colors of his racism and his hatred with Jesse Owens. But in November of 1938, you have an open Nazi degradation of Jewish businesses. And so you can see the broken out store windows in the cities. Beyond the cities, the synagogues were attacked, lit on fire. Copies of the Torah were brought out and destroyed. Rabbis brought out into the street and made to take part in rituals to denigrate the Torah, humiliated in front of their communities. Hitler makes his move to really begin to openly press his agenda and the subhuman treatment of Jewish race. Boy, it's not going to be too much longer until we see the Germans. Actually, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I love these pictures, right? Here's the German army invading the Netherlands, and here, right, you gotta hate that if you're a Frenchman. One of the all-time most in-your-face pictures in history, right? The Nazi Party, okay, is going to go from a party to a worldwide force in just a short amount of time. Look at that. right? A domination of so many lands. And this started with Hitler and the Nazi Party. So we'll get into some more specifics about how all this happens. But for right now, we're going to say goodbye and sign off, and you're going to go take the quiz on Nazi Germany before you move on to Mussolini, Italy. All right, guys, thank you.